Welcome everybody to today's class. Today we are looking at Of Mice and Men, which is a story by John Steinbeck. I'd like to look at the vocabulary and the grammar in this story, and I hope I can show you that he's a great writer because he has used a lot of rhetorical devices and he's used an interesting clause structure. He's used a lot of interesting sentences, and I hope I can show that he's been using a lot of the things which I've been speaking about in previous classes when I've told you how to make your sentences more interesting, or I've explained at least several ways that you can make your sentences more interesting. And I think the best place to find interesting sentences is in books. So if we look at this, the first few paragraphs of Mice and Men, and anybody can find this story online. If you just put Of Mice and Men PDF into Google, you will find a copy. So notice that it starts with a fronted adverbial phrase, a few miles south of Soledad. Now, it started with this fronted adverbial phrase, and that's why we have a comma, and then we have a main clause. The Salinas River drops in close to the hillside bank and runs deep and green. So we've got two verb phrases now. We've got drops in close to the hillside bank, the first verb phrase, and runs deep and green, the second verb phrase. Okay, so he's used two verb phrases in the very first main clause. Another thing to notice is how many adjectives you can see. Now, I've put a lot of the adjectives in grey, although some of them are nouns. This one is a noun, the dark, but there was a further adjective, dark of face. And I've highlighted these adjectives. They're in grey, but I've highlighted them because there is a lot of repetition with the adjectives. You see deep, deep, deep with these adjectives. So it runs deep. Further down we have deep and so crisp, and then further down again we have deep pool. Now this repetition is not coincidental. He's done this on purpose, and repetition is one of the main rhetorical devices, really. It gives the text a poetic feel, the repetition of the similar adjectives. It's not just deep, 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 which is repeated. You also have green, green, green. So it runs deep and green. And then we have green with every spring. And of course, green is a colour we associate with spring. And then later on, we have green pool. So there's a lot of repetition on this page, and it helps to give the text that kind of echoing feel where you have the words echoed over and over again. So we also get limbs, limb, limb, horizontal limb, the limb is worn, and mottled white recumbent limbs. And notice that when he uses adjectives, he uses them in a lot of different ways. Sometimes he says adjective and adjective, adjective and adjective. So he says deep and green, he says strong and rocky, he says fresh and green, he says deep and so crisp, small and quick, thin and bony. But sometimes he uses asyndetic coordination, which just means no conjunctions. That's all it means, so no and. He talks about mottled, white, recumbent limbs, and that's three adjectives used together. They're coordinate adjectives, so he's got a comma in between each one, and we call this asyndetic coordination when there's no and. So that's another way that he's using adjectives. Okay, now another thing to notice is the repetition here of on one side of the river, on the valley side, on the sandy bank, on the sand, on the sandbanks. So there's a lot of repetition